Well, I think in this whole notion of like opposites, from going to the opposite extreme, from BioShock, taking, you know, dark and foreboding, and at least to some extent turning it into bright, you know, sunshine. There's a natural a polar opposition between the confined spaces, confined pressurized spaces beneath the sea, into the open and airy space of Columbia. So part of it is just exploring these opposites. And a lot of it, you know, early on from there started to come together. We said, well, if we want something to be in the sky, we don't want it to just be a sky box. We don't want it to just be that there's a matte painting in the background that tells you you're in the air, but we knew that we needed like movement. We needed even the way that the player moves, you know, hence skylines should reflect this being suspended, being, you know, held aloft and moving very quickly. And visually, at the beginning, we were thinking that what we'd do is we used Art Nouveau as a motif to characterize the entirety of the city in the way that Art Deco was used to characterize all of Rapture. And as we started looking at more and more options and ways to construct, because, you know, in the very, very original test, everything really was Art Nouveau. Every piece of furniture, every building front, you know, purely high Art Nouveau. And we started to see that we had more range when we were drawing on what is it called, like, you know, the Federalist style and neoclassicism, which is like what you see, you know, in like the American Capitol. That's used in any number of countries as well for, you know, state buildings and stuff like that. But drawing on that started to make a lot more sense in some areas, you know, as like, but considering the nature of Columbia itself as, you know, being just sort of this the advertisement, you know, of America. And we found ultimately that you can have a variety of textures and feels within the city and still have the city feel as though it's one cohesive unit and not just a hodgepodge of random areas, like here's the fire area and the ice area and stuff. Any real city can have different faces to it, you know. Like you go to one corner of London and it will look very different than another, but they still together feel very much like London as a whole, and it's like that bigger picture that tells you something about the city. So I think you'll see in Columbia, also there's, after the beginning, you'll see that there's a huge range of appearances for it. And hopefully those are as interesting as the ones you've seen so far. Yeah, that's one of the exciting things I think for us is to just this simple act of moving a building around, but as far as like making that function in such a way that, you know, our characters could traverse back and forth between them and, you know, jump from a skyline onto a building that's moving at a different rate than another building. Those were, you know, technically complex, and but we wanted to pursue them because on one level it made for interesting gameplay possibilities, and another, it really helped the city feel believable and as though it were actually airborne. And again, you know, again, rather than just there being a painting in the background that tells you you're in the sky. You can have clouds passing between them, you know.
And airships going between.
Yeah, moving.
Like buses.
Yeah, flying buses, pretty much. This is definitely, and hopefully they'll forgive me because I have to speak for our artists on this one, and this is very much their expertise. So they do any number of things, from actual real-world traveling to go to locations. There were times when several of them came to Europe to look at different points in, I think in Belgium, I believe, and in Spain, different areas where there's Art Nouveau. They will actually just do traditional research with books, going to museums, museum libraries, and look at catalogs of clothing, the way that fonts were used, the way that hand written typography played a role. We had at times specialists come out to the studio who, you know, people who specialized in one aspect of, like, say for example, the use of electric lighting in the air would come out and talk to us about how, you know, in around the advent of the electrical light, it was completely different than now, where we want to conceal everything. Like if you look in this room, it's all very much about, you know, you hide the lights away, whereas at the time it was so remarkable. You wanted to put the light out where everyone can see it. It's like, we have a light bulb, look, don't miss it, you know. So, yeah, just a combination of seeking every bit of historical knowledge we could put into the blender that we then reconfigured to tell our own story. And there's a lot of, I think that people will appreciate it, a lot of attention to historical detail. And if something isn't literal, obviously because we're inventing a number of our own things, because this is our, you know, invented world, you will see maybe an analog, or you'll see that it is the natural fictionalized extension of thinking at the time.